So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon to whoever is following this meeting and this open class from home or from wherever. This is an open class, but also an event organized by our university within Book City. And the reason why I thought it would be a privilege to have a conversation like the one I am looking forward today is because as part of our job, we have until now only looked at what happens to specific organizations. But in fact, these specific organizations, even in the age of internet, insist on some geographical areas. And this, if we take this, so to say, geographical perspective and also a relational perspective, there are a lot of interesting insights that we can have that have an impact on the conditions of economic viability, specifically for individual organizations. So if I were to say a slogan, space matters. Space matters and relations matter. And of course, one of these relations and this relationship with the space have an impact on different aspects. And one of the things that that happened as a consequence which is part of the debate when we are looking at this has to do with the fact that when we look at cities, these cities may have different characteristics, for instance, in their neighborhoods. And if we look at how people behave, how economic actors, we would say, behave in a city, distance matters. And one of the recent area of debate has to do with proximity. What happens in short distances. And this explains the presence of one of our guests, which is Ezio Manzini, who wrote this book, because it's called Book City, because there are books matter. And this is the book that he recently published with Egea, and helps us really think about this idea of what is proximity telling us as far as the urban organization is referred. And then the second, then we have two more guests. They are Joe Flynn and Rhys Williams, and they come all the way from Manchester. Thank you very much for being with us today. And what is interesting here is that there are some cities that belong to a network that is called UNESCO Creative Cities. And the rationale behind being a UNESCO Creative City has to do with the idea of really leveraging on some creative sectors. More specifically, Manchester is, like Milano, a UNESCO Creative City of Literature, which means that there are some elements that the city has decided to highlight, again, to stress these relationships that take place within the city and among cities. One of the reasons why Joe and Rhys are here with us today is because we have Book City and because Milano is a UNESCO Creative City of Literature. So this is more or less what we are going to talk about today in this second session. So keep in mind all our ideas about the behavior, the decisions, the choices of individual organizations, and let's add a geographic dimension, a space dimension to it. Ezio, thank you. I've spoken enough. The floor is yours. Thank you for being with us.
I thought that you was going to make some questions, so or I had to start from.
Well, the overall, the starting and the launching question is really, why is proximity? Why are we so thrilled about proximity? What is proximity teaching us? Why is space so interesting, particularly now?
Okay, thank you so much. Well, proximity is a term that exists in every language that I know, more or less with the same meaning. It has not been invented now. So probably the problem is why we are talking more about proximity today than 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or 1 century ago. And if you read the newspaper, if you look to also the programs of the mayors that have been elected recently, all of them in some way talk about proximity. Maybe the most popular way to talk about proximity, maybe you have heard, is the city of the 15 minutes. And I want to explain after what it is. In general, let me anticipate something very simple. The very simple is imagine a city or a space in which wherever you need for your everyday life is at a walking distance of less than 15 minutes, but could be 10 minutes from where you are. And so this is a very, very simple, but as we will see, it's a dramatically new way of thinking the city. But before explaining a little bit better, we are also in a university, so going a little bit more in depth on the notion of proximity, let me say another thing that maybe is a little bit the core message that I want to transmit with you. There are several motivations that I will say why this term is used much more today than in the past. Maybe even too much, as it happens when a concept is very successful, it's started to be used and sometimes also abused, as it happens with many other successful stories, successful concept. But I think that we will not be, no, I don't know, maybe we will be in any case, but there will not be so many people discussing about proximity if we have not the COVID issue. So it's strictly related to the COVID issue. And why is it related to the COVID issue? Because the COVID in some way obliges us to what has been called the social, or maybe it's better to say the physical distancing. And having the obligation of having this physical distancing, people discovered how important is proximity. And therefore, as it happens with many common goods that we do not recognize the importance until the moment in which it's lacking. So we recognize how important is air until the air is good, and so it's appeared to us normal as the water for the fish. But it's only the moment in which we don't have a good air that we recognize how fundamental it is for our life. But the same could be for a safe city. If you live in a safe city, it appears to be very obvious what you do. You can walk around or go everywhere, and it's obvious that it's safe in general. And if you go in a place where this is not, so where this safeness of the city do not exist, you recognize how complicated is the life. So this is to say that there are something that appear to us very obvious, and so we do not recognize them until something say, look, this is not anymore the case. So as a matter of fact, people recognized the importance of proximity, and I will say maybe not everybody with the same word that I'm using now, but everybody in some way recognize the importance of having in the neighborhood somebody that you know, having in the neighborhood some shops and some services. And this has been not a theoretical or philosophical issue. It has been a philosophical issue, even though implicit probably. But people recognize that it's important. And this is very meaningful because for a long period, we have been in some way blind toward all what is our position in the space. I can talk about a kind of taxonomy. So where we are, where physically our body and the bodies, inverted comma, of the things that are around us are in the space. Because there has been the overwhelming discussion narrative about the virtual space, the digital space, the possibility to be in contact with everybody independently from the space. That is true. We have had a very important report on the fact that we was moving from the space of place to the space of flow. Maybe you know, Castells wrote important fundamental books on this topic years ago. We talked about the end of places, and there have been books about the no place, the end of what had been called a place, because it was not necessary anymore. And therefore, all our attention has been toward the digital component of our space, in some way forgetting how important is the physical one, because in any case, we have a body. In any case, our body is somewhere in the space. And so even though we had in some way forgot for a period that we are in the space, also physically, our body was there. So even a person that is the dystopic view, or somebody that do everything from home and who use only the digital space, so in some way his life or her life is mainly in the digital space, but the physical body exists, and the physical body is somewhere, and the physical body asks for something, for a flow of material, energy, etc. So in some way it also shapes the space. So in the moment in which we did not care for this topology, so where we are, in some way we lose the capability to care of it. So for me also, some part of the environmental problem depends on the fact that living or thinking to be living mainly in a digital space where you do not have you can have interaction independently from the physical distance, you do not care for what is near, and so you don't care for the environment. So given this, I was saying something happened in this huge social experiment that happened worldwide, because the pandemic, as can be told and seen and discussed by so many points of view, and each one of them is dramatic. But in any case, it's a kind of social experiment. So millions or billions of people had to change the behavior from one day to the other one. So every time that you have a change like this, something will happen. And now we are trying to understand what are the implications of this change. And the implications are, some of them are unfortunately very negative. And I don't want to talk about this now, but they are. Probably also is the majority is negative. But there is also something that could be, for us, at least for the way in which I try to propose you to look to the reality, something that could be positive. And one of the things that is positive, that people say, hey, my neighbor, even though I don't share the same interest in books, even though I don't share the same ideology, even though we don't play the same game that I can play with these virtual communities around the world, I share with my neighbor something that is fundamental. We are sharing the same space. And sharing the same space, for instance, we can help each other. For instance, we can care each other, because I don't know if you know about care, but there is a whole literature about care now, mostly in the feminist line. And there is this lady that is della Bella Casa, Puig della Bella Casa, and she said care needs the touch, need the proximity. She don't use proximity, but this is the meaning. So you cannot care without being in contact. At the end of the day, you can also organize some system to care, but at the end of the day, care is one person in front to another one that exchange something. So the need of care that you recognize in the moment of catastrophe, the moment of difficulties, bring people to recognize that with your neighbor, in any case, whatever is his thinking, whatever kind of music he listen, whatever kind of dress he dress, you have something very important. You are in the same space. And when you start to think in this way, I think that this has been particularly evident in between individual and the system of shops, of offices, of opportunity that you can have around, that I call the proximity system. But it's something more generally philosophical than that. It's a different way of looking who we are and our relation with this hybrid space in which we are. Because in any case, we live in a physical hybrid space, not only now, but now more than previously. And another effect that everybody knows of the COVID is that billions of people has in some way moved the center of their own activity from mostly physical to mostly a hybrid of physical and digital. And so this is also a change. So whatever we will talk about, if we say the term proximity, or we say the term community, or we say the same place, today we have to keep in account that it's not the proximity, the community, and the place of the past, but it's a proximity, community, and places that are hybrid in any case. And we have to understand how to reevaluate what is all these terms. And this now going to the original question, but I said already something that I wanted to say. So what about, so given all that, it came in the mind of many people, including myself. So I did this book because this reason. So it was coherent with something that personally I was doing since a long time, but the urgency of doing it has been because me, as many others, started to recognize this new context. And so I said, maybe it's important to try to go a little bit more in depth. And to go in depth in relation to what? As I said before, and that's probably, hopefully, you know, the way of talking about the change in space in the city is under the umbrella of the city of 15 minutes. That is a beautiful slogan, because it's one of those slogans that is immediately clear. So you say the city of 50 minutes, people say what it is, but imagine blah, 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 and everybody understands immediately. So it's a very powerful slogan. So it's very good. Afterward, maybe we can discuss if there will be strong policies strong enough to make it real, but it's a very good slogan. But it's a little bit shallow, because it looks about what they now call proximity only by the functional point of view. So also myself, when I introduced you, I said, now I tell you in 3 words what it is. It's a place where whatever you need is nearby your home. And it could change the life of people if you are in this condition. But this is only the functional part. And as a matter of fact, in every language that I know, proximity has a double meaning, because it means to be near physically, and if you are near physically, you can have a certain kind of interaction in different services, in different activities that you can do together. But in every language that I know, proximity is also a human proximity. It's something related to, I call it the relational proximity, that is about empathy. It's about care. It's about willing to establish, open yourself in front of somebody else. And this dimension of proximity is equally important than the other one, or maybe even more. So I don't want to say which one is more important, but it's very important. You know that in the cities, not only in the cities, but mainly in the cities, one of the pandemic issues that we have now, not to abuse of the term pandemic, is loneliness. So there are statistics that tell that one of the problems in the city is that people is more and more alone. And therefore alone means distancing, means not having opportunity to find how to interact with people. And it's proven that there are some people, especially the older one, and there are a growing number of older people that do not speak with anybody. Therefore, this idea of proximity is an idea that link together the physical aspect to have services nearby where you are, and the relational one. Why? Because, and this is very interesting, because if you say, oh, we want to reduce the risk of loneliness. Okay, I think that who could deny that this could be important? And what you do to reduce? You cannot force people, you have to be friendly with whoever, because this cannot be designed. And the power of the concept of proximity, that having this double link, this double face, you can increase the functional proximity, creating condition in which people has more opportunity to intersect one with the other one, and giving an opportunity, not an obligation, but an opportunity to start conversation with others. I mean, if you live in a place where it's a kind of social desert, so there is nothing around you, the possibility to have this kind of interaction are very low. And if they are very low, it's very difficult to start a conversation with whoever, for the very banal, simple reason that you don't have the opportunity to meet people. Where if you have the condition that is the functional side of proximity, that around your home you have the shops, you have the offices, you have maybe also your work, the possibility to interact with other people increase. And with this very pragmatical increase of the number of possible interaction, you have more probability that you start conversations. And the conversation are the basis of creating new social form, creating new community, making together some projects. So this, for me, add to talk about proximity to the very good slogan of the 50-minute city is that make more clearer that we are not talking only about the physical one, but also about the relational one. So maybe to conclude, and afterward, maybe you can ask me something that you feel to be more interesting. Let me say only why are the now, I said before that it became so popular now because of COVID, but if we look where it comes from, it's a long story that if you ask me, I can tell you a little better, but it's a long story, so it's not, more or less what I'm saying now has not been invented or discovered now. It has been discovered a long time ago, but now, for the reason that I said, it became more evident, and so this is, for instance, an object of discussion like this. By the environmental point of view, you can say, why is it important? Well, first of all, I can say there are a network of cities. There are so many networks of cities. There is one network of cities called the C40 that are they were 40, now are many more cities that want to be particularly advanced, that choose this idea of the 50-minute city as one of the strategy to become sustainable. And you can say, obviously, if everything that you need is nearby to your home, you reduce dramatically the need of unwanted travel. So you are not obliged not to travel, but you are not obliged to travel if you don't like, or simply because you have to go to the office, go to the shopping, go to the school of the kids, go to the place, etc., etc. So this is the most obvious, and less traffic means less pollution. But not only, because less traffic, less pollution means also less stress. And so in some way, you give back some time of people, because if you do not have to commute every day, you can have more time, more qualitative time to do something else. So this is the first important, but there is also a second one that is in the frame of the environmental issue, that is about resilience. Because maybe I only say the title and after I stop, but the same dramatic case of COVID tells you that when you are in a catastrophic condition, the only way to react in a positive way, so to be resilient, is to create a group of people that are locally aware where they are and who they are. And this has been proven in many very specific dramatic cases. So when you have an earthquake or a flood, what happened? It happened that a society where the people are linked in between them and to the place know how to react to this catastrophe, where the place where people are all individual and waiting individually for some information that comes from the top. If something happens, if the communication are broken, they do not know what to do. So if you are interested, we can talk more, but this is the idea of a resilient systems are the ones that are horizontal and distributed. And therefore, the city of proximity is a city that in some way goes in the direction to become a more resilient city. You know that the city as they are now are super complex, but super fragile for several reasons. And the city of proximity could be a much more resilient city. And afterward, there is the social sustainability, because the integral ecology that we would like, the integral sustainability that we like, cannot talk only about the physical issue, but has to talk also about the social. And I already say why it's so important to create possibility for people to interact.
Thank you, Ezio. That's super. I find this super interesting. I forgot to say, and I apologize to you and to all of you, that as you can imagine, the background of Professor Manzini is not that of an economist. So he's very much paying a lot of attention to design, to urban design. And what is fascinating is that, again, when we say urban design, we have several layers. And you mentioned, so when we think about proximity, imagine what everything that we have been discussing about the appropriate size of individual organizations. So the whole concept of scale. Sometimes we favor concentration of size and competencies for economic reasons and for skill reasons. So this perspective completely changes the conditions for economic viability. And for instance, if I may say, while you were talking, I was to some extent impressed by when you said that it's the 15-minute city is a slogan, but it's a little bit shallow slogan. So I would say there is another slogan that you hear very often vis-a-vis the city of Milano, which is the polycentric city. And sometimes these two concepts are used as synonyms, whereas it seems to me they are not necessarily synonyms. And then the second question I have for you is that when we think about this proximity, one of the thoughts that I think about that to me is linked to the concept is the idea of habits. The think that sometimes you develop a relational proximity because, for instance, there are some paths that you do every day. And for instance, this could be super interesting when we think about reading, that you go to every day to the same school. I mean, I have been coming here for 35 years. So, I mean, it's like, no. So there are some paths that you do every day, which imply some specific relationships and some specific encounters with, for instance, economic activities or social activities of different kind. I would like you to elaborate a little bit on this.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, if we talk, if I listen to somebody in the bar that says proximity and the city of proximity and the polycentric city, I will not go there and say, no, look, it's not, because at the first level, okay, it talk about a city that was totally concentrated towards something that is a little bit more spread. And therefore, we are in some way, some steps in the same direction. But in a place like this, we can, and maybe also could be useful to see where are the difference. So let me say the way in which I see the thing. The polycentric is a typical term used by planners. Planners see the city from the airplane, from the helicopter. It's called the helicopter view of the city. So you see the city as a whole, and you can see the city with one big center or many poles, one here, the other one there, etc., etc. And so this is a way to look to the city and to see, oh, something is happening. It's not anymore so concentrated, but it's spread. Where this story about proximity is to look at the city from inside. And this is very different. For instance, I'm not a planner, so I am a designer. And my point of view, and the one that has been promoted, not by me, but many people in the past, if you talk about the city, the only that was legitimated to talk about the city were the planners, and afterward the architect. They had to put some objects inside. So the planner do a two-dimensional plan drawing where things have to be, and afterward arrive the architect and put some objects that are the buildings. But nowadays we know very well, and this course and the discussion of today, that the city, that is super complex, is not made only on two dimensions of the plans, not only by the buildings, but so many layers of activity, of services that are inside and they mesh one with the other one. So from the top, you can see something. From the helicopter, you can see something, but you don't see what is happening at the corner of the street. So how people behave. What is the relationship between the people, the space, the tram, the buses, the bicycles. So if I want to talk about this way of considering the city, and the city is mainly seen by the citizens, and the citizens see the city not from the helicopter. They see the citizen, as she was saying, walking through the city. So it's a kind of journey that you do into this complexity, look into things by a certain point of view. So the city of proximity is, the proximity is always in relation to the subject that is speaking. So what is proxim, what is near? What is the quality of the system of proximity around where I am? And therefore, it's a totally different way you look into things. A second element is that I've not said, but this very simple and handy term, the city of 50 minutes, that seems so easy, it's not easy at all. Because we have had, I've not said, but maybe you can imagine, the pre-modern city was a city of the 50 minutes. Before having the media of transportation, before having telephone, etc., the only way to interact was physical moving from one to the other one. So you had a total mesh between the different functions, the rich and the poor, because the poor was a servant of the rich, and you had this kind of very mixed, by every point of view, city. All the modernity has been an attempt to separate the rich from the poor. The different function with something that for the planner was called the zoning. And so you put all the residents here for the rich, all the residents for the poor here, all the place where the people work, if they are employees here, all the manufacturing here, the factory here, and afterward also the business center here, and so on, and the leisure here, and so on and so forth. So it's been separated, and this is the city of distance. And the city of distance is the background on which we are trying to discuss about the city of proximity. So to move toward the city of proximity means, if we are lucky in a place as in Europe or in Italy, in particular, we have historical center, we already have some place that is not so far from a city of proximity, because it is what remain of the original old pre-modern city. But all the tendency has been for 1 century to break this kind of condition and to create new cities that are totally away from this. So when a mayor say, I want to do the city of proximity, sometimes people say, yes, but if you are in Milano, there is an area here in between, as we are in this moment. Yeah, it could be improved, but by this point of view, it's not so dramatically different. But what if you go toward the center, where there is a totally transformed by the business activities, commercial activity, or if you go to the periphery, or if you jump and imagine a city of 20 million people in China built with this modernist principle in 20 years. So when you really take this idea, you take it strongly, it's not easy at all to realize it. And so it's a change in the way in which you imagine all the infrastructure, but also the way in which you think, and the way in which you think the economy. And maybe I have to finish because it's too long. But what you are studying now, and I really hope that you can do something, is to develop something. Sorry, I'm not an economist, so I hope not to say something totally wrong, but what is the economy of the proximity? Because there is some element of economy that could depend from the fact that people are in the same space. And you have done what has been the journey traditional, so I deal more with social issues, so I'm more accustomed to talk about social enterprise. But also for the social enterprise, if you look to the literature of social enterprise, is mainly one by one, independently from where they are. But there is the suspect, and more than the suspect, that if they are in a place, the place where they are is meaningful. And to finish, I can make one example that I hope will not confuse you. But in the 70s, when the very Italian phenomenon of the economical district appeared, came people from MIT to study something that was inconceivable, because the only idea of industrialization was the big company. So what was happening that this Italian was doing such a success 70s, and afterward, unfortunately, many things happened. And nobody had taken account that having several hundred of people doing the same thing in nearby and being at the same time in some way relatives and going to the same osteria and so exchanging something, they could create what they call the co-opetition. So they were in some way in competition one with the other one, but also competing. Well, we are not talking about the same, because the characteristic of them was to do all the same. They all was doing ski boats or a certain kind of machinery, etc., etc. But nobody had taken account the environment in which this happened. And at that point, people started to understand the power of being in a certain area together. Now that story is finished. But we should see if we could find something else that help to understand how we can create some kind of symbiosis in between a diversity of activities that being together can reinforce each other. And if one of these activity is some cultural dimension, some cultural activity, it could be a library, it could be a school that is open. So all the people that is discussing about proximity says also that it's good to have some space that is a kind of hub that in some way represent this condition. And the hub has to be mainly a cultural hub. And in the discussion, for instance, I participate to some meeting or some courses about the library, and the discussion of how the libraries should change in the moment in which you consider the city in a different way. So what is the role of the libraries? That could be not only the one, it's a main thing to have the book and to give the books, but also to create around the books conversation, being a place to reconnect, to reweave the web of the society. And I think that the answer only the first one, but it was sufficiently long, so I stop here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Maybe we can switch for a moment. Maybe we will discuss later on where do we put the center when we consider 15 minutes, but that's another thing. Okay, one of the there are some cities. I mean, we can say that all cities are cultural in the sense that all cities have people. And when you think about UNESCO and you associated the term UNESCO to the term of city, very often, particularly in this country, you are led to think about heritage, world heritage. But in fact, there is a cluster of UNESCO locations that are basically trying to dig into the interplay between the social dimension of culture, the relational dimension of culture, with the economic dimension of culture. And these are the so-called UNESCO Creative Cities. And now, And creative cities are labeled in terms of what is the dominant cultural industry that is represented in the area, because, as Professor Manzini was saying, one of the characteristics of cultural industries is that they tend to be geographically clustered. So when we say that Italy is famous for opera, it is not Italy. Opera production and opera distribution is geographically concentrated. There are some regions in Italy where you have a lot of theaters and the tradition of opera is way stronger. Similarly, when we talk about books, the city of Milano in this country is super strong in terms of the economy of books. There are many publishers, many bookstores, many libraries. So there is a physical presence. And then, of course, there is a relational presence. And so what is fascinating, and we are very happy to, is that, okay, how once you have decided that you want to label as a city of, in this case, literature, as it is the case of Manchester, what does it mean? What does it mean specifically? What does it mean both in terms of physical presence throughout the city and in terms of relational opportunities, and also in terms of the habits of people? I am sure you read the statistics that said that during COVID, we went online much more, but at least in this country, the physical distribution of books in the last mile distribution resisted very well. Was super active. Small independent bookstores were very active during COVID. Generally speaking, we increased our consumption of digital content, but for instance, Spotify did not grow so much because people didn't commute. And one of the jokes we were making before is that you know, a very fantastic moment for reading is commuting. So let's, I'm going too far now and I apologize because I made our friends wait here. Let's learn a little bit more about Manchester and what does it mean and what are the implications of labeling yourself, particularly in light of what should happen in the city and where in the city.
Thank you, Paola. Hi, so I'm Jo and this is Reese, and what we are basically going to talk to you about today is hopefully an example of putting what Ezio is saying into practice and what that could look like in a city. We are going to look specifically at communities in Manchester. The case study that we're looking at is around a festival that we put on that was a festival of libraries in Manchester, and how that, basically we're going to talk you through how that might look in terms of what Ezio is saying. So I want to start by saying, I'll give you a bit of context, I guess, into UNESCO, into Manchester and Milan as a city of literature. And I want to start with that image that Ezio gave us of the helicopter view. So if you imagine you are even higher than a helicopter, you're up in space in a rocket or something looking at the Earth. UNESCO operates globally. So they recognize everyone, you know, all cities all around the world. There are more than 250 creative cities that have been designated by UNESCO. That's a lot of cities, a lot of people represented. When you think about how many people there are in Milan, in Manchester, think about that times 250. Now, they're not all cities of literature. There are lots of different disciplines. There's gastronomy, there's film, there's folk, design, there's music, lots of different things that have been recognized for historical reasons, but also contemporary too. What's going on? Like Paola was saying, you know, what are the industries like? So yes, that's UNESCO as a whole. But then if we come a bit closer, so you're out of your rocket and you're in a plane now, and you look at the UK, for example, we have 5 UNESCO cities of literature specifically. Now there are, I hesitate because we've just added some new ones, 3 new ones last week. 42. There are 42 cities of literature in the world. 5 of them are in the UK. And what you can picture here is that opens up such a possibility of sharing, and we all get to speak to each other. We're all in that network. We learn, you know, we're here visiting you in Milan today. And there's a lot of that sharing best practice, sharing ideas going on all around the world. Now, come out of your plane and come right down into Manchester. One thing that we did as a city of literature is that we look at we're quite unique as an organization in that we're not sort of tied to any one organization. So not only are we in this huge UNESCO network of people, we're also working really locally, and we're tied to the universities in Manchester. We have links to the libraries, we have links to the bookstores, the publishers, all of those people. And we actually have nearly 40 partner organizations with Manchester that make up Manchester City of Literature. And we're proud to work with every single one of them. Some of them are huge, you know, the universities, like here. Some of them are very, very tiny independent publishers that might be one person that's creating books. So again, you think about that scale, that concept of scope in, you know, globally, but also really, really locally. So coming back to the 15-minute city and that concept, what we think about when we think about that is, okay, we have this great fact in Manchester, and it would be interesting to hear what it's like in Milan, but in Manchester, 99% of our residents live within 1.5 miles of a library. Now you could, if you walked fast enough, I think you could do 1.5 miles in 15 minutes if you were quite fit. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to say, okay, well, let's think about that as 1.5 miles distance. You know, from where I'm sat now, what is in 1.5 miles radius of where I'm sat? So everybody in Manchester is that close to a library. And that means there is a great free democratic space that is a place where people have this access to books and literature and all of the benefits, you know, the health and well-being benefits, the educational benefits of libraries, but also it's a democratic space. It's free, you don't have to pay anything to be there, you don't have to buy anything. So we're really proud of that, and it's also a great infrastructure for the city. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about why, now that you've got the contextual information, I'm going to talk to you about what we did to really highlight libraries in Manchester and how great an asset that they are to us. We have an incredibly rich offer of libraries in Manchester. We have 4 historic libraries that are very, very close together. We've got 25 public libraries just in the city centre, and my numbers might be off again, but I think it's 133 in the boroughs of Manchester, so we call that Greater Manchester. We've got, you know, one in terms of those historic libraries, we've got one of the oldest surviving free libraries in the English-speaking world. We've got the John Rylands Library, which you might recognise if you're a Harry Potter fan. A lot of it was filmed there. So you can picture those kind of structures that I'm talking about, those historic libraries. Manchester Central Library, it is the UK's busiest public library that's 2 years running now. So yeah, we're extremely proud. We have the Portico too. It's an independent library, 450 years old. And we, you know, coming right up, it's not just the historic ones, it's the real contemporary ones as well. We have just opened this summer Manchester Poetry Library, part of Manchester Metropolitan University. It's a library dedicated to poetry. It's the first of its kind in the northwest of England. So that's kind of why Manchester, why libraries. And Rhys is going to talk to you a little bit more about the festival and what we did.
Thanks. Hey everyone. So with that context that Joe's just shared, we wanted to kind of convene a festival of libraries, which really celebrates the amazing work that our libraries do. But I think what's really important, and I'll say this at the beginning of this reflection, is that we wanted to put together a festival for people and for the people of Manchester. So it took place over 5 days back in June. And we did a hybrid of events, so online and in-person events, 83 events in total. So we didn't charge for people to access it. And that's a really important element because for thinking about proximity, sometimes proximity is about cost, and it's about barriers, the barrier of access to something. We involved over 50 writers and artists, so we're a city that's really proud of the writers that are in Manchester. 25 libraries hosted, so again, it was a real partnership effort. And there was a kind of programming from many of our literature partners across the city. And all 10 boroughs of Greater Manchester got involved. There was not a single borough that wasn't involved. And that's also really, really important, because sometimes there can be a massive emphasis on, I guess, populating places where we know people are going to come anyway. But we really wanted to challenge that and make sure that every single borough was represented in the work that we were doing with the festival. And we kind of did a range of activities across a number of strands. So we did Inspired by Libraries talks, where we had librarians and well-known figures within Manchester speaking about their experience of libraries. We had artists in residence, which Joe will speak about in a little bit, activism, well-being, creativity. And we also did an outdoors and families strand as well. So we built digital trails for families to go on themselves. And we commissioned writers to kind of work and support us on making that happen. It's a shame I've not got the slides here, but I'll quickly read the quote. I'll read a section of the quote. It's probably long and a bit boring, but anyway. This is from Councillor Radman, who is an executive member for Skills, Culture and Leisure at Manchester City Council. And I guess I'm reading this quote to speak about why it's really important that you have collective buy-in from the city, because too often, historically at least, it's been the writers and the publishers and the bookshops and libraries that are shouting how wonderful libraries and books and culture and literature is. But we need every single person, and particularly those people who represent us from kind of a political point of view and strategic point of view, to be making that case for us as well. But Councillor Rahman said, libraries are creative community hubs that provide a vital lifeline for communities during lockdown, with essential internet access and online support and services such as digital borrowing. And they will be vital to Manchester's recovery from the pandemic to build resilient neighbourhoods. I am proud that Manchester has continued to invest in our libraries to provide vital free access to information, learning opportunities and reading for pleasure for all in Manchester.
So there's that word resilience again. So a few of the aims, I guess, and Reece sort of touched on it, of the festival, which we've covered. I think Ezio covered it really well, and I hope that we're sort of showing you how you might put this into practice from an arts management kind of perspective. But some of the aims that all of those people that are involved and invested in of the festival were to engage new library users, re-engage lapsed library users. You know, in a digital age, so many people might go on Spotify, but actually, like Paolo was saying, you know, book sales did soar, they did well, and so did e-borrowing from libraries. Invigorate that library image, that maybe they're not cool, but we tried to make them cool, which I think we were successful at. I like to think so. But involving the local communities, involving those people, again, coming back to that fact, every Manchester resident, or no, 99% of Manchester residents live that close to a library, 1.5 miles. They have to have that engagement. It's so important. Showing the scope of the library offer and the range of services, truly citywide, which Reece talked about, and celebrating the benefits of literacy and culture, which can really bring people together. So there are two particular things. We're going to go down even further now and look at two particular things we did during the festival to really emphasize that community engagement and getting people invested in their own, you know, what's nearby to them in their own spaces, getting them to own their libraries, because libraries are for people, public libraries in particular. So one of those was the artist residencies that we held. So we had 5 artists in residence for the festival, for the duration of the festival. This time round, they consisted of 3 writers, a musician and a visual artist. It was important to get those sort of different disciplines. You know, literature is not just about books as much as people might think it is. We also had 2 virtual writers in residencies from other UNESCO cities of literature. So again, it's that global network coming into play. We had a writer from Iowa City in America and a writer from Melbourne in Australia, who are both cities of literature. You think about the distances that we spanned, and we brought their input into Manchester libraries. So all of those residents, so there were 7 in total, so that's including the UNESCO ones, they were paired with a different Manchester library during the festival to work on, create work that was inspired by the library. And they then also held workshops in the local community to create work by the local community. So whether that was writing poems or writing memoirs or creating music and songs, they worked with those community groups to create work. So it wasn't just the artist coming in and saying, well, I'm a writer, I'm going to write about this library or whatever it is. It was the community writing about it. It's about that civic pride, being proud of the area, being proud of the space that you live in. There's all sorts of things to sort of note there, but it was really important that we ensured it was a democratic recruitment process as well. So it wasn't just us saying, we like that writer, we're going to bring them in and put them in this library. It was up to anybody who had a link to that local area to put themselves forward and say, yes, I'd love to pitch and I'd love to represent that library and write about it and work with the community. We went through a judging panel. It was all of that work that went in behind it to make sure that it was democratic and that community experience was a factor in that decision making. So what did the artists in residency groups create? It was really important to us to continue the legacy of the festival way after the festival had finished, because how else are we going to build that collective pride? We hope to host the festival every year, but that might not happen. Obviously, I'm sure you as economics students, a lot of you will understand we don't always get the funding in the arts, but we're hopeful. But yeah, so to continue the legacy of the community work, there's 2 written pamphlets that were written by the local community that are now stocked in the libraries for free. People can take them out and read. I've got some of them on the table. If any of you want one, you can take those away to look at. We also have a festival theme song which was created by the local community. It's on YouTube if you want to listen to it. It is very good. Like Reese mentioned before, we have self-guided app-based walking tours. So again, it's that idea of space, and it was also important to us to connect up the libraries and think about what are those, there might be a selection of people that often go to one of the historic libraries, but are they aware that actually there is a public library that's half a mile from it that they could walk to? So yeah, joining up the space and joining up that library network so that people can just go on their phone, do a self-guided tour between the libraries. And as I say, we had the virtual writers in residency. So there's also now writing about Manchester libraries in Melbourne and in Iowa City. If you're interested in any of that, it's all available on our website. And then Reese is going to talk to you a little bit about one of the other things that we did.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Joe. So something that was really important to us, and with it in mind that whilst 99% of our residents are so close to the libraries, we were really mindful that there's a real disparity amongst some communities and how they might access or might not access literature. And so we placed a real emphasis on making sure that families from diverse backgrounds were able to access the various activities that we put on during the festival. And the way that we did that is we actually employed Tunde Adekoya. So Tunde Adekoya is a colleague we've worked with on a range of different projects, but Tunde works in community engagement, and although his background is primarily in putting on music events, he is a real community figure. He understands how communities think and how diverse communities think. He understands what their needs are, and he's somebody that usually, generally speaking, if he says this is something for you to get involved in, people usually listen and kind of get involved. So we asked Tunde to support us in getting through a number of diverse families to actually access the various activities that we did. So we did the Family Fun Day. We wanted to make sure that they access that, and also some of the online family-friendly content. And a big part of what Tunde's work was about was challenging the conventional notion of who literature is for. And we recognize as Manchester City of Literature and across the literature sector in Manchester, we do this part really well, that often the best placed people to connect with what we traditionally call hard to reach communities, or those groups that don't maybe visit the libraries as much as other groups, or those who don't read for fun, for leisure, is because often the people that are encouraging them to do so don't look like them. So if me as a black man who's a member of the Caribbean community, taps into my local community, I look like them. So there's already a level of trust, and there's a proximity, as you were speaking about, in that we have a shared experience and almost a shared language and a shared culture that in many ways breaks down that wall. So we asked Sunday to do some work for us, and he did a brilliant job in bringing in a diverse range of families and about communicating to us what the needs of those communities were. Something that we did, which was really important to ensuring that they got in and took part, was around incentivizing that experience, because sometimes we ask people to come out to an event on a Saturday, for example, when a Saturday is the only day that they've got to go shopping, to do the washing, to maybe go to the mosque or go to church. There's so many different things that are competing for their time. So it's not as simple as just saying, you know, this community doesn't read for leisure, or this community doesn't enjoy going to the library. There's a lot more complex elements that are at play. So we actually paid the families for their time to actually be present, and then to actually give us some feedback on what that experience was like. And then what's really important is that we're taking on board the feedback that they gave to us and the needs that they communicated to us, to make sure that the future program is reflective of those needs, because there's no point in getting somebody through the door who maybe traditionally doesn't access the type of activities that are being put on, and then not listening to their experience and doing something to ensure that more people come through. Yeah.
I was going to talk to you a little bit about marketing the event in terms of community and making sure that is accessible for different communities. I won't go through the whole thing, but one specific thing that we did when we were promoting the festival, you know, we did all the traditional things. We had press and advertising and social media and digital. Obviously, in the world of COVID, it was so much more important than it ever would have been before. Like this one, you know, we had a lot of the events were hybrid events in terms of digital access, but we also made sure that the marketing was completely owned by the communities and by the libraries. We made it all, it wasn't just like, oh, here's a poster that you can put up in the library. It was, here's a blank poster with a logo on it that you can handwrite on it, you know, come to the library at whatever time, or you can stick it in the supermarket or wherever it might be. Those again, thinking about that wayfinding around the city, is where are people going and where are those communities going that we want to access. So that was just something I wanted to mention about the marketing, is keeping it accessible and personalizable. Is that a word? We'll say that's a word. I think it's going to be important for us to talk about evaluation. Do you want to do that bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think something that's really important, and we kind of centered our whole planning process for the Festival of Libraries, was around evaluation. And it's really important to have that at the forefront of your thinking before you go into delivery, because too often, you know, you produce an event and you've got a fantastic idea of a way to engage a range of people, and you don't think about how are we actually going to capture those experiences and learn from that in a meaningful way. And so we kind of, had a really robust evaluation process for all of the activity across the Festival of Libraries at the heart of our thinking from the beginning. And we're really excited that that's going to enable us to actually produce future events, future festivals of the library that are really responsive and reflective of the needs of our community. So some of the highlights are important things to note, that, you know, participants via the audience survey, and 96% said they enjoyed the event. So we surveyed via, like I said, this audience survey. 96% said they enjoyed the events. That's a good start. 78% gained new knowledge and skills, and I guess that knowledge is not just about content, but sometimes it's about knowing what is available within their communities, and that's also really important. 44% noted an improved well-being, and there's extensive research, definitely at Manchester City Council level, that notes the relationship between literature and well-being. So 44% noticed that difference. 31% said it had changed their view of libraries. And again, that's really, really important, because we know through personal experience and lived experience, I know, speaking even outside of my role, libraries literally changed my life. But there's still a perception that we need to change. And that perception is simply that libraries are for everyone, and there is a library on your doorstep that is there to serve you. And 39% have said they will visit their library more often as a result of actually being part of the Festival of Libraries, which again speaks to the wider ecology and the wider cultural experience of people in Manchester. Yep. Some lessons that we've learned from the local community. So again, the feedback we've had from both the family strand, the work that Tunde did, and generally on the evaluation, is that having a role in the program and having a say in, for example, the writers that they engaged with is really, really important. It's really important that collectively we have a sense of ownership, because often, and this is definitely the case in Manchester, I'm not sure of the reality in Milan, is often we can see from that bird's eye view that there's an issue in a particular community, and we parachute something in. That's what we call it in Manchester. We parachute in like paratroopers to save the day, and then the community are looking at us like we didn't ask for this, and they turn up their nose and they turn their back, and actually they're in a worse position now than if we would have done no intervention whatsoever. So we're learning and being reinforced of the importance of engaging and asking the question. And actually it costs us nothing just to ask the community, how can we serve you? What is it that you need? Alongside this, actually, as we were developing the Festival of Libraries, we've been rolling out our Community Champions program. So as I said before, we're learning that there are certain communities that don't access literature in meaningful ways and on their own terms, in ways that are accessible and exciting and agreeable to them. And we figured that it's often because of representation. We know that at least historically, the literature sector is not as diverse as it could possibly be. So we've kind of challenged that by placing community champions. So people who are literature professionals, that's not necessarily writers or publishers, but people who have a relationship with that local community and also speak the language of that community. And they've been co-designing with the community interventions that could be workshops in journalism, for example, that we're doing in a particular community. We've been working with the Black Pentecostal community, faith groups in Manchester, who maybe only read spiritual texts, so only the Bible or things alongside that, to look at how can we change some of those reading habits and improve well-being. So we've been doing journaling, we've been doing poetry and music, a range of different interventions. Yeah, and I think more than anything, we're kind of building a legacy off the back of that to the participants that take part in the activities through the Community Champions program will also be part of the next Festival of Libraries program. So they'll be doing readings of the memoirs they've been developing and the poetry and the music they've been shaping. Yeah, and I think more than anything, we're reminded of the benefits of partnership working and why it's really, really important. And I think it was strange because myself and Joe started we started a week before lockdown in Manchester. And it was a challenge, but it was really refreshing because it enabled us to really take a broader look at what's happening in the city and really develop those partnership relationships. And rather than it being a question of, or rather us putting forward, here's exactly what we want to do, we were able to ask our partners, how can we best serve you, and start to work together. So yeah, we're learning the importance of sharing resources, and that's not just financial resources, but also time and skill set and that communal spirit. And yeah, just to be motivated to be all pulling in the same direction.
I think just to add to that point that Reese is making, and maybe I should have said this at the beginning, there are only 3 of us that are currently working at Manchester City of Literature. That's me, Reese, and our colleague Ivan. So if you think about the scale of this festival and how many organisations and other people and commitment, how much commitment they must have put in, like we're here sharing it with you today, but it wasn't ours, it doesn't belong to us, it was the whole city that really got behind this project. And that, I guess, is the point that Reese is making. That's a real key takeaway, is that there was so much investment from so many different partners and organizations, and also going back to the UNESCO network, it was global too. So I guess shall I hold that? One of my questions to you is when you look at the infrastructure in Milan and you look at, Book City Milan is a great example of this, but are you within a mile and a half of a library, or what's within your 15-minute range? How can you look at that infrastructure and really sort of tease out the community relationships there? Yeah, and those interactions too.
And also, how can you pull those institutions closer to communities?
Yes, yeah. So yeah, Reese makes a great point. Institutions' relationship with the local communities, which I hope we've demonstrated a good case study of today. And the community's relationship with those institutions too. I think we'll leave it there.
Thank you very, very, very much. I would like to know if there are some questions or comments on this. I don't know, Ezio, if you have questions. Of course, we always have questions. Let's see if there are some questions from the audience. One of the things, okay.
Yes, actually, I have a question about proximity, because I was thinking about the new project of the current company called now Meta instead of Facebook. And I was thinking about that Meta probably is yeah, I was thinking about that probably Meta project is exactly the opposite, or at least can be considered the opposite of the project of proximity, because if in proximity we have this stress on human contacts, with Meta we don't have human contacts anymore. It's completely different. It's a virtual world. So what do you think about it? Do you think that Meta is the opposite concept of yes. Yes, I meant a metaverse. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Any other question, any other comment? Okay, maybe Ezio, you can start answering this.
Well, thank you. A long time ago, when the digital issue started to spread, there was two metaphors. One was the virtual world, and the other one was the augmented reality. And they are totally diverse. And at that time, luckily, the virtual world do not had any success. So we moved toward the augmented reality. You know what I mean when I say augmented reality. The difference is the virtual world, you have your mask, you sit here, and you imagine to be in a parallel world. The augmented reality, I'm here, and for instance, I could have the name of each one of you. When I talk with her, I can have something that show me who you are. So I am physically in a place, and the digital system increase in some way my potentialities. So luckily, for me at least, you understood how I think, the two, the one of the virtual everything was really dystopia, because it was to forget where you are and to imagine that you have a second life somewhere. One of the most important platform was called Second Life. Well, luckily at that moment it has been deleted, and everything moved toward the augmented reality, and there are a lot of problems also with the augmented reality, but at least you have human people in the space with their own body doing something and trying to understand better how to. Now this story of the metaverso is bringing us back to that kind, for me, of totally dystopian world, because it's a kind of drug. You escape from your reality. And now this is a long story, we cannot do it. But look, they are more or less the same, similar people from evolution of the Californians. One say we have to escape taking our spaceship and moving to Mars. So giving the idea that maybe we can escape from our physical Earth with all the problems that we have, and so we go to Mars. That is totally foolish, but it's a way to, in some way, I don't know if they are in good or not faith, but to move us from the problem that we have. That is the one that we are seeing COP26. And this one is telling, okay, you are here, but you can stay in your sofa, and with your mask, you can have whatever kind of activities. So it's the contrary of any idea. As a matter of fact, when we talk about the scenario of the future, we have a different scenario in competition. We have the continuation of the traditional scenario of distances, the one of modernity, that through what is called a certain interpretation of the smart city says, you don't worry, you do what you have always done, consume as you have done, but with our technology, we will solve your problem. So don't worry, there are some problems and we will solve it. But there is also the one that says, no, we are going to change everything. You can do everything from home. And so it's a scenario of everything from home and in home and from home. And this is also dystopic because your body is in a box somewhere and you are thinking that you are doing everything in a kind of alternative world. And but your body is consuming the city or cities in any case, and you have all the physical disasters. This scenario do not take in account that in any case, beyond the consumption of energy, you know that all these digital issues are consuming a quantity of energy that is incredible, even though they seem to be so light and immaterial. So the scenario proximity is a scenario to re-recognize that we have a body, that we are in relationship with others, and this is the way to be sustainable and to care. And well, you understood which one is my one. And I find that to go back to this idea of living in the virtual world with the mask and moving, it's awful, simply awful.
If I may make a suggestion on this, on Book City, before the starting of Book City, there has been a series of conversations with authors that you can find all of them on the Book City homepage. They are all by international authors, and so they are, of course, on subtitles. There is one that is by a scholar that I particularly like. His name is Appadurai, that basically deals very much with the issues we are talking about. And on a completely different note, the current, I think, a cover article on the current issue of The Economist addresses this type of topics from a quite different perspective. So just as we were talking about. Any other comment? Yes.
Hi. I'm very interested in what you said about the importance of engaging hard to reach communities, otherwise they will kind of reject you as a festival. So I was wondering, how do you engage hard to reach communities? Like, how do you get them to be interested, to care about a festival, about reading, which is something that not everybody does on a daily basis? So how do you get them to be engaged, to actually like participate exactly in a festival about something that not everybody might be passionate about?
By the way, as they answer, think of what we can do to engage people in this university to read more, just not to go too far away.
Thank you. Really good question. I think the most important thing, and I always start with this, is that it's not the communities that are hard to reach. Like, I love saying this because I truly believe this. It's not the communities that are hard to reach, but it's the art forms and the institutions and the gatekeepers that are hard to reach. So I think the most important lesson and the starting point is that we should not expect communities that historically have been shut out from our scene and from our sector to openly engage with the work that we offer. So what's really important is we need to meet them where they're at. And it feels like in many ways, the first year of my role, or the first 6 months, I felt like I was boxing with one hand behind my back, because so much of the work that I do is literally getting out in the community. I'll take my laptop, I'll go and sit in a coffee shop in a community that I don't know particularly well, and just people watch and introduce myself to people. I will make a habit of sitting in that particular library, and that's the library that I work at for the week. The second thing I wanted to say is that we also need to broaden our understanding and our perception of literature, because if I said to a particular community, I want to encourage you to read more, automatically they're going to be like, ooh, because the only thing I read for is to pass the test, or the only thing I read for is to understand this letter from the council or this bill. But if I was to say to them, let's find a way to, for example, tell your story of how you came to be in this community, or if I said to them, we're going to write a comic book together, or I said, we're going to write song lyrics, we're going to give you a musician and you're going to write and make music together, then their eyes will light up and it becomes a totally different conversation. So I think a big part of that is us as producers of literature, almost changing and challenging ourselves to think differently around what is literature. Yeah, does that answer your question?
If I may make a comment, because this morning we were addressing exactly the same issue with the organizers of Book City. And one of the things that Book City wants to do is really bring reading all over the places. And so we are talking about an initiative that has 1,500 events. This is one event, for instance, out of within 4 days. So, and the city of Milano is divided up in neighborhoods, and there are 88 neighborhoods in the city. And within the 10 years, Book City succeeded in reaching every neighborhood. Now, if you start thinking about that, you could go, wow, fantastic. But then the goal is not in itself to reach every neighborhood. Who cares if you reach every neighborhood for 5 days? In fact, it might be quite anti-economical. And a lot of the critiques around Book City, for instance, refer to the fact, why so many events? And so we started addressing this issue and saying, okay, if we want to bring reading in different communities and we want to bring books to people and not people to books necessarily, how many events there should be in one specific neighborhood? And this event, who should organize this event? And should we bring the very famous author all the way outside, or should we have a specific community chooses whatever is relevant? Another thing is that why do we all pay so much attention to libraries? I was very impressed by one of the things that Ezio was saying earlier when he said, you know, in many cases, we take many things for granted. We take for granted to be in a safe community or in a safe city. If you think about it, libraries are a public place, so a place where you don't have to pay to get in. And in principle, they are safe place. How many public and safe place do you know? So if you start thinking in this way, then you may think, okay, libraries might not be the place where you get books. I mean, you are experts on libraries. We discussed all these things when we were looking at the New York Public Library system and the institutional structure of New York Public Libraries. But in light of the discussions we are having here, and thinking about the value that whatever organization brings and whatever is legitimate to ask for, having places, physical places that in principle could be used in several ways is pretty valuable. And it's pretty valuable in a variety of situations. Basta, questo è quello che volevo dire. Okay, any other comment? Any other question? Okay, well, if there... Oh, yes,
no, I hope to be short this time. No, I want only to underline that, again, it's a little bit, when something is given so in a simple way, it looks like obvious. But also this kind of way of talking about a festival is not obvious at all. Because I want to make you recall, for instance, if you have the Festival of Venice, that is also an important festival. You will not criticize the Festival of Venice. Or more popular, if you have the Festival di Sanremo, they are a kind of UFO that arrive in a place without say, yes, the city have the tourists, etc., but do not participate. And this has been the idea of the festival for a long time, the only idea of festival. So for some reason, I think that we also need the festival as the Venice or Cannes or this kind of festival. But here we are talking about a totally different festival that includes the people in the community. And I will not elaborate too much on that. I only wanted to underline with you that is not obvious at all. So this kind of festival are very typical of the moment in which we are. Unfortunately, as I was saying before, this is not the only idea on the table. We have also totally different ideas. So there is a real, for me, war of ideas. It's a war of ideas because there are very different ideas that compete for the money, compete for the direction where to go. And so listening to something like this, it's in some way normal, but it's not normal. It's a disruptive normality because it's not normal in relation to what normally has been thought as a festival. And I think this is very important to be said.
Yes, thank you very much. Because if you think about, from a pure economic perspective, think about it, and you want to measure the benefit of a festival for a community, it's just so much easier to measure the number of tourists and the economic outcome than it is the involvement of the community in reading. So we have to be very, very careful. I mean, sorry if I keep talking about measuring, but that's what management is all about. What gets measured gets done. It's a mantra. So the point is that, okay, how can we be rigorous enough in measuring something that is quite honestly very difficult to measure? Very difficult to measure. So I think, so I would like to thank you very, very much because this has been a quite interesting conversation to broaden up our ideas. If any of you is interested in the topic, there are two more events taking place. One has already started in Egea bookstore. It's going to be in Italian, and it is about why do we need to represent women in the public space? And the excuse is that, as you may know, Milano until 1 month ago had no statues dedicated to women with a name and a family name, whereas there were 161 statues dedicated to men. So you may think that, and since 1 month ago, we have one statue of a woman who died 150 years ago. Her name is Cristina Trivulzio. And one may wonder, isn't this like a 19th century style to set up a statue? Why do we need also at least one statue for a woman in a city like Milano? That's the talk about. And then tomorrow, we have another event. It's going again to be in Italian, and we still keep on the conversation on the UNESCO Creative Cities. This time, we will be talking about the management of networks, the management of creative city. And the focus of our analysis are going to be the different Italian creative cities. So there's going to be Milano, Torino, Parma, and Carrara. So literature, design, crafts, and of course, gastronomy. Thank you very, very much for your time and attention. Thank you so much for our guests. Thank you for those of you. And good evening. I think we can ask you to have your slides, and I will post them on our Blackboard for you to have.